Okay, all set, Commissioner.
Okay, hi, everybody. So calling the meeting to order at 2:01 p.m. And I will just alert everybody I'm going to be driving for about 5 minutes, and then I will join you on video as soon as I get in front of my computer, which will be 5 or 10 minutes from now.
Commissioner, could I, before we get going, recommend a change to the agenda? We've got agenda item 5B, which is the CPACE Mystic transaction that we wanted to remove from the agenda. So I just propose a revision to the agenda to remove agenda item 5B.
Okay, and do we need a motion to approve that?
We do.
Okay, can we get a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any opposed? All in favor?
Aye.
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 And any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay,
Great, thank you.
you have the.
Okay, let's see. We're at the public comments portion of the agenda there, Commissioner. Maybe we lost you.
Okay, am I back? Sorry about that.
There you are, yep.
Okay, so yeah, we're at the public comment. Do we have any public comments? Okay, hearing none, I think we can move to the next agenda.
Great. We've got the meeting minutes from the December 9th, 2024 meeting to approve. And then within the materials, we provided a report out on staff approved transactions under 500,000 and no more in aggregate than $1 million. There was one project in there in the town of Cheshire, totaling nearly $500,000. And then we have the report out of staff approved restructurings or write-offs where there are no transactions. It's just simply a report out. So resolution number 1 is on the table.
Okay, can I have a motion to approve resolution number 1?
May I just note, it's a small matter really, and made possible that I haven't noticed it before, but Kimberly is misspelled in the minutes. There's an extra E in there.
Sorry about that. We will
That's okay.
get those changed.
So it's just RLY, not RELY. It kind of looks like Kimberly. Anyway,
We'll make those changes.
thank you. With that, I will make a motion.
Second.
Right, any discussion, any other changes to the minutes? Okay, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Is that last aye, was that an opposition or in favor?
I think I was just a little late coming off of mute. That's an aye.
Okay, so we have all in favor, no opposed, and any abstentions. Okay. That motion carries. Thank you. Brian, what's next on our agenda? Or have you
Great.
lost?
Okay, great. No, totally there. We've got agenda item 4A. So this is going to be a Green Bank Capital Solutions project, Bright Feeds. Excited to have Lee and Austin present our first environmental infrastructure project. So let me turn it to Lee, and you can coordinate there with Austin.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Chair DeNicola. As said, Austin and I, with some backup and support from Larry, are excited to bring you the environmental infrastructure team's first capital solutions project for resolution. As you well know by now, the passage of Public Act 21115 in June of 2021 enabled a new phase of our efforts to carry out the Green Bank's mission, signaling a broadened scope for environmental infrastructure, which is inclusive of waste and recycling. In support of the comprehensive plan in 2024, the Green Bank Board expanded the Capital Solutions Open Rolling RFP for clean energy and environmental infrastructure, which is what we're bringing to you today. During the March board meeting, we also presented the last in the series of our environmental infrastructure primers, which detailed Connecticut's waste and recycling crisis and our priority investment solution and approach to organic waste management. In terms of the overarching policy context, Connecticut's goal per the 2016 Comprehensive Material Management Strategy, or CMMS, which is codified in General Statute 22A-241A, was to divert 60% of municipal solid waste from the 2005 baseline by 2024, obviously falling far short of that. The CMMS also codifies goals to reuse, recycle, and compost 1.46 million tons of material and divert 300,000 tons of food waste to more sustainable uses, such as anaerobic digestion and related food waste recycling strategies, including organic waste upcycling for beneficial use, such as animal feed. For the 2015 waste characterization study, food waste is Connecticut's second largest waste stream, nearly 520,000 tons per year, or over 22%, with the majority, or 57%, from industrial, commercial, and institutional generation. The state's potential diversion is over 965,000 tons, or approximately 41.4% of compostable MSW. That's an estimate, not all is reclaimable. But we are falling far short of this potential across the state. Per 2022 data, only 326,000 tons, or about 9%, were diverted from over 3.1 million tons produced. And that's broader than just food waste. So the policy goal is 60%, the reality is less than 10%, and the potential of organic compostable materials is up to 40%. So a really big opportunity for us. Further compounded by the 2022 closure of the Mira Waste to Energy facility, which reduced in-state processing capacity by nearly a third, prompting urgent calls for diversion and infrastructure solutions. So as such, this is all to say, investment in organic waste management solutions represents one of the most significant opportunities for the Green Bank to support policy goals and address this waste management crisis. So I'm going to flip it over to Austin in just a moment to talk about Bright Feeds, who is on track to process approximately 100,000 tons in the next 12 months and 160,000 tons annually at their full permitted capacity. They are the largest permitted waste management permittee in the state. And just to kind of zoom out from this particular transaction, this project is the first, but represents a pipeline of opportunities to support organic waste management solutions in alignment with the goals of the Act, with state policy targets, and in-state processing capacity needs. It's in alignment with our waste and recycling primer and with the 2025 comprehensive plan. So I will pass things over to Austin.
Thank you, Lee. Here we go. So it's a pleasure to be presenting this opportunity to you all today. I hope you've had a chance to read the memo, and I'll take that as read. But just to recap, the request in the Deployment Committee memorandum is for the approval of a term loan to Bright Feeds, described by Lee, for not to exceed $1.3 million. This term loan would be used to finance the purchase and installation of a regenerative thermal oxidizer, secured by a first lien on the oxidizer equipment in itself and a general lien on all other assets across the business, subject to approval by existing senior lenders and customary exclusions. We can jump to the next slide as well. Just to provide a brief overview of the business for this discussion, Bright Feeds has been operating for several years in Berlin, Connecticut. They have developed a proprietary waste management process that converts organic food waste to animal feed This is unique and differentiated from some of the other waste management strategies in the state and across the country, in that their profit margins on the animal feed side allow them to accept large volumes of organic waste and differentiated types of feedstocks from some of the other solutions at very low tipping fees. So this business represents a very commercial and accessible strategy for diverting food waste in Connecticut that enables Bright Feeds to effectively reach commercial food producers that haven't opted into diverting their food waste with higher tipping fees. So we see it as a really competitive and innovative strategy. While the loan is specific to a piece of equipment that supports Bright Feeds environmental compliance, which is necessary for their continued operations of this facility. We're supportive of the business at large and are excited to work with them on potential future opportunities around diversion infrastructure or other as they continue to grow and scale in Connecticut. And we hope to be a part of supporting that journey. To provide a little bit of background on the business, as they started, as Lee mentioned, they have received the largest waste permit in the state. So they've been operating under a waste management permit. But as the production levels of the company started to scale to higher levels, as they were building new accounts and demonstrating their process and really dialing in their systems, some local concerns about odor coming from the drying of the food waste started to pop up in neighboring communities. As Deep got involved under a nuisance odor concern, they identified that there were volatile organic compounds in Bright Feeds emissions from their facility, not previously recognized in the waste permitting process, and that those emissions would require an air permit. We can jump to the next slide here as well. Because I think there's a couple points in the memo that I would like to provide additional update and clarification on. In the memo, we state that the oxidizer had controlled all regulatory concerns related to emissions, and that was a misstatement on our part. The oxidizer has demonstrated the effective technological control of emissions. Bright Feeds installed the thermal oxidizer in early April and had a third party come out and measure the emissions levels to prove that it was effective at destroying volatile organic compounds in excess of 98%, which is highly effective. But that does not mean that they have received their air permit. So I want to clarify explicitly that Bright Feeds has applied for an air permit as of last week. They formally submitted that. That permit is under review by Deep currently, and Deep has not formally or regulatorily confirmed that the oxidizer has resolved air emissions concerns. So the statements in the memo to that effect are based on the technological reading of volatile organic compounds when the facility was operating on a test case basis at full production capacity. Happy to answer more questions on that matter, but did want to just highlight that in this overall presentation. Since the installation of the oxidizer, Bright Feeds has continued to increase their production levels up to approximately 170 to 200 tons per day. At that level, that is where they have previously demonstrated profitability, and we anticipate that at the proposed time of loan closing and when the debt service coverage ratio covenants kick in after 18 months, Bright Feeds pro forma projections demonstrate their ability to effectively meet those loan conditions as measured at the Connecticut facility and the Massachusetts operations, as opposed to measured across the overall parent company. Now, as Bright Feeds resolves their emissions issues, they're looking forward to scaling further in Connecticut, supporting further diversion at higher volumes of food waste in state. And that's in addition to growth in other markets. So they're pursuing second facilities that demonstrate and build on what they've built and demonstrated in Connecticut. So they're replicating the strategy elsewhere that was incubated here and are looking forward to moving on in that growth journey, and growing in Connecticut as well. And we think that this loan has the potential to support them significantly in that journey. We think that, Green Bank capital in this use case helps bridge the gap between the economic viability needed to attract and grow these types of ventures while meeting the environmental standards of a densely populated state that is seeking waste independence. So this term loan is against just that commercial equipment within a larger, innovative business that really helps Connecticut solve its waste issues and accomplish its waste management goals. And in support, or the staff is recommending today to the deployment committee the approval of a 1.3 million term loan to Brightfeeds, contingent on the satisfactory review of a engineering report that was in process, and review and satisfaction that the status of Brightfeed's air permit does not pose any undue risk to the proposed Green Bank investment. I'll leave it there for questions, and I'm happy to dive in. Thank you.
Austin, I have a question. The condition about the air permit, why aren't we waiting until they have an air permit? It sounded like the resolution was something short of that. I mean, why would we issue the loan unless and until they have the permit?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And sorry, I forgot to speak to this slide, but
And
part
Matt, I'll
of
just
that
jump into this is when I talked to Lee earlier today. That was the exact question I had that they walked me through. So similar concern. But go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe just before answering that question to finish here and share this proposed update to the resolution that reflects the additional information just provided on that previous slide. We've removed that subject to completion of a favorable review from the engineering report and amended that to state subject to a determination by staff that there is not undue permitting risk associated with the facility upon review of the applicable engineering report and any additional materials. So then to answer the question of why would we provide this loan prior to that permit being in place, it's a bit of a unique situation in that Brightfeeds has deployed a lot of capital and committed to, providing waste solutions in Connecticut without, necessarily being made aware that that air permit was required. Given this is somewhat of a novel proprietary process, we understand that was an honest mistake, something that ideally would have been flagged and surfaced earlier. But they had already started, developing what is a new technology and building their brand and awareness by the time that this issue was flagged. So they then, to manage emissions, were collaboratively working with DEEP to reduce processing levels as an intermediary step to manage emissions until effective control technology was in place. Since that point, emissions have been demonstrated to be under control, but the company was, somewhat financially stressed or had to reallocate capital that was planned for other purposes to purchase and install that oxidizer. And so that clock has already started for the company financially, and their capital is tied up in that oxidizer. So that $1.3 million inclusive of the equipment and the installation. We believe it's prudent to provide that loan as soon as we can adequately assess and resolve or mitigate any risk associated with the permitting status. So that could either be accomplished by advancement of the permitting status, an intermediary step or disclosure from DEEP, such as a consent order that specifies what needs to be done to reach permitting. And if something occurred there with DEEP that got the Green Bank to a comfortable level, we would be cleared to proceed. So it enables us to provide confidence to the business that this loan is coming once they clear that through, and to do so once that risk is adequately resolved, understood, or addressed.
I guess in some ways that explanation causes me more concern than comfort that they got that far and deployed that much capital without knowing, doing enough diligence to know what they needed here. I mean, I know everything, things slip through the cracks, but I think it's also a yellow flag to us that they're kind of new at that, or they don't know, maybe they don't know what they don't know. So I would be more comfortable being more cautious. I mean, if there really is no undue permitting risk, one would assume the permit's going to follow pretty quickly. And if it's not following very quickly, then maybe that's an undue risk. And
Yeah,
given
so-
the neighbor issues with smell, I mean, I've had this with tipping stations where we've represented them and they create a big odor. And neighbors can petition, I believe. I mean, Joe could add some clarity, but petition for a contested case and delay things for quite a long time. So I guess I'm just not sure what we're using as a measure of undue permitting risk, and whether frankly we have, the experience with air permits to know what an undue permitting risk is.
Yeah, I think those are
This is
great.
This is Dominic Austin. I have another like clarifying point on that, or suggestion or question. If the approval of DEEP and the permit was made an actual CP to the loan, to closing on the loan, would that be one way to solve this, or is that going to cause it's sort of an unnecessary delay from the company in terms of the cash flow? Like if what we're saying is that, like, hey, this might happen in the next month or two, can we just make that a CP for the loan that they actually have their permit in hand?
Yeah, thank you, Dominic. I think that is a good example of what a development in their status that would adequately resolve the risk, either if the permit comes through in itself in entirety, or if we're able to get more confirmation and confidence from DEEP as to what would happen in the interim, being defined in a mutually agreed to consent order between Brightfeeds and DEEP. And additionally, as we go through the engineering report and technological review, I think we will also have a much better picture. We have, Brightfeed's permit application on hand. And so after that develops with DEEP in the company and the picture emerges, I think we'll be able to make a call as to whether this is adequate risk or not. That's not based on our technical understanding, but would be based on what DEEP has been able to say formally on the matter and based on third-party technical expertise and review. But that's also not to propose that we would need to accept or go forward with the loan at that stage if we were uncomfortable with any risk. And to address the question of, given that they didn't flag this initially, does that raise any sort of character concerns about the company's maturity or experience here? In my opinion, I don't think it does. I think it's a good question to ask, but given that this was predominantly a waste management strategy, they were working very closely with the DEEP waste management permitting team, and it is ultimately the company's responsibility to know what permits they have required and to seek those permits. But our understanding after talking with both parties, DEEP and Brightfeeds themselves, is that this was a very honest mistake, that they've been a very sophisticated, proactive company in navigating this solution or navigating this issue and working with DEEP on a solution. I think also the stage that they're at significantly de-risks any concerns about the level of their maturity or expertise or knowledge. So they're producing right now at approximately 200 tons per day, and the thermal oxidizer is in place and installed. So if we look at the sections of the memo that describe some of their customer relationships with really, blue chip customers, like I guess I won't name them in this public forum, but they have really robust sourcing agreements and customers for the offtake of their feed and investors involved in their new projects that give me a lot of confidence in the rigor and maturity and potential of this strategy. And then I think we can also rely on the engineering report to confirm all of those impressions. So it won't be based on our expertise and understanding of the technical aspects of what they're doing. We've commissioned SES Engineering, which is a nationally recognized organic waste consultant. They regularly do consulting on environmental permitting for waste management facilities, food waste facilities, stuff like this. They've actively been consulting on the design and development of projects in Connecticut that are going through the permitting application process and have been doing this for decades in the US. So we'll ultimately be relying on their review and engineering report to validate any assumptions on their technical competency.
So, Austin, can we make it a condition precedent that they have their permit before we issue the funds, or are you saying we can't do that?
I'm not saying we can't do that by any means. I think that I would like to leave it open to staff discretion, understanding that that may very well be the condition, but in a scenario where Deep and Brightfeeds negotiate a consent order that provides satisfactory confidence and the tech in combination with the engineering report, I would like to keep that open to consideration if we hit that level of confidence prior to the permit being finalized.
Well, I have two questions. Sorry, I don't want to dominate. One is,
Yeah.
and it's yes or no, and I'll ask both, and then you can answer them. One is, have they bought it sounds like they've purchased the equipment already, A, and then B, I don't know what you envision in a consent order. I mean, Deep can't make the permit requirement go away. The consent order, it would seem to me, would be that they shall get a permit. But if you envision, like, what other consent order could Deep issue that would take away the permitting risk?
Yeah, so first one, just to simply confirm, yes, they have bought and installed the equipment. They're operating the facility with controlled VOC emissions. So when we come back to the consent order and the permitting risk, I don't want to pretend to be an expert in navigating that risk, but I do think it's plausible that we can appropriately understand and put boundaries on our understanding of that risk, either through that technical review, definitions of what it would be required from Brightfeeds to achieve that permit, and in combination to that, reviewing the effectiveness, the currently demonstrated effectiveness of the oxidizer as the best available control technology. My understanding in the permitting process is that it's largely based on demonstrating that capability, and Brightfeeds has a lot of rigorous research and reporting on that we can confirm with our engineer. But ultimately, Matt, I hear your point, and it very may well be that that doesn't get us there. I just think that given the materiality of the timing here to the company, it would be efficient as well from a board perspective and approval perspective to either make that determination at staff discretion or an appointee of the board chair or otherwise who may be in a better position to approve when we get there.
And if I could
An
just jump in.
advantage of seeking this approach is that implicit here in the approval, it would be an approval of the overall loan contingent on either a precedent to closing or approval itself or on drawing capital. So it allow us to say to Brightfeeds and their investors relative to their plans in Connecticut that the Green Bank is supportive of this loan and all other conditions of this loan, precedent to this condition, whether that be the permit itself or something else. Getting that approval today would say, we've got the majority of that review done, our board's on board, and it's just this remaining piece.
I was just going to add, Matt, I think you're asking a lot of the same questions that I had. And I think this is a very a good line of questioning. To your point on Deep, there's not a lot, first of all, that I know about the permitting process that Deep is going through, but also not a lot I can say about that. Although I do know that when Deep receives applications for permits, the response time can vary considerably. So I think that is one of the issues that the bank and Austin are wrestling with is there is quite a bit of uncertainty around the timing, even if there's not a concern there, it can still be an extended period of time. So I think that's one of the challenges that the team is wrestling with.
Yes, I think that's a great point. And to add to that, a consent order might also lay out the necessary steps required for compliance in addition to that timeline, which would further allow our technical review to estimate or assess any risk there and ultimate permit approval, and then be adaptive as the permit timeline moves forward.
I guess if it's a question of the ability to attract other capital or a cash flow issue, I get it, and all could be well, and it just takes time. But I think the prudent thing to do would be I'm happy to see it approved, but either not draw capital until it's permitted, or kind of, draw enough capital. If they've already purchased it, I assume they financed it. I don't know. Maybe just meter out the capital and not send out the whole million. Again, if we anticipate approval is going to come and it's not an undue risk, I would assume there's a quantifiable estimated time, notwithstanding, Joe, your comment, which I do understand. Anyway, it just seems like handing over the full 1.3 maybe is premature, but I have no problem like supporting the concept and sending the signal to their other financial partners that the Green Bank supports this, all that other stuff. And again, maybe I'm being overcautious. I don't want to speak for everyone else, but I definitely support the concept, would like to see it voted on favorably. My druthers would be to have a little brighter line before we deploy the full amount, especially if they've already financed this and it's just a cash flow issue. But I don't, I looked at the memo, but I don't see some of those details in there. So I'll leave it at that and see what everyone else thinks.
Thanks, Matt. And just to clarify, yeah, so they have deployed, it's not financed. They reallocated growth capital there. And so they want to get back to putting that growth capital to work on building accounts in Connecticut. And certainly agree, we're not rushing to deploy capital here until staff would be completely comfortable. In this scenario, we're envisioning Bert as the staff who would provide approval there, and I don't think he's going to be quick to accepting permitting risk unless it's really adequately resolved. So I don't want to confuse things here, that we're not resolving to deploy capital that's exposed to permitting risk, that we plan to and are seeking permission for staff to adequately assess and resolve that risk. And I see Bert's hand up, so I'll let him speak to that potential discretion and gating criteria.
Yes, so the questions that are being raised by Matt, Dominic, and Joe are the ones that I raised, and I think Brian Farnan perhaps also raised some similar questions. So I think what we're grappling with here is there any reasonable discretionary authority either at the staff level or as between the staff and the chair of deployment that could work as we get a clearer focus on the permitting risk. I mean, I share the gut reaction of particularly when it comes to air permits. I've had, unfortunately, 40 years of I say unfortunately for the 40 years of experience with air permits across a range of projects. They are always gut-wrenching experiences, but yeah, hopefully we can get some a clear line of sight as to where DEP will come out on this pretty soon. So I think that's what we're just grappling with. But yes, I'm definitely going to be focusing on, is this a risk that we can take? There's enough clarity in the future process of DEEP, and it's pretty straightforward and highly objective. Or are there intervenor risks that I think Matt pointed out that we have to concern ourselves with? And when does that come into play? And when does that, is that contained at all, or does that continue through the process? Those are process issues that I'm not terribly familiar with. So that's kind of where I am. Thank you.
And Brian, I see your hand is up as well.
Yeah, I only kind of got a full understanding of the permitting issue this morning, and kind of went back and forth with Lee on it. Obviously, permitting risk is not something we typically want to take on for obvious reasons. You know, I guess what the attempt here with this revised resolution, where I did have my hesitations, was, okay, can we get to a place where we get the approval, but it's only within this certain box, that certain things need to occur? And the one thing I obviously first said was, well, we won't release funds until permitting. And I didn't get like clarity on that was an option. So I guess if that's not the option, that would typically the place where I would like to be, as the lender, is we wouldn't release funds until the permitting risk has subdued. Is there something, Austin or Lee, that you could offer up that's as close to that as possible, so that we would get that level of comfort, and then maybe that would kind of put some of these
Yeah.
fears and concerns to risk?
Yes, and I think to be blunt and transparent, it sounds like it will need to be permitting. I think the only reason I'm trying to keep this open-ended is that this is a bit of a unique situation where the facility is operational. They're able to demonstrate that their process is well within compliance or above the best available technology. And if we were confident there and as deep issues their consent order, if we were able to reach confidence at an earlier stage, it would be materially beneficial for the company there. Whereas, if there's a long drawn out public comment period that doesn't pose any reputable sort of demonstrated concerns that this technology is not the best available control technology, that could
What would be the
unwarrantedly
bright
delay.
line? Like, we will release funding when X, Y, and Z occurs, and when X, Y, and Z occurs only. Maybe that level of kind of understanding would be helpful to the committee members, so that we can have certain guardrail.
Well, and I
Yeah,
think, let me chime in, if I may, just to say that I think those guardrails are what we envision, without wanting to detail specifically what they will be today, but rather as part of the resolution text amendment here, to get permission for the process and pathway to make that determination with, and we can potentially add back language that.
No, I'm sorry. I know I froze up there. I don't think we need to include it within the resolution, but we at least need to have an understanding of where the committee members, direct us. So it's not really about, I don't know if it's really clarity in the resolution, but it's clarity in the minutes that, subject to determination by staff, that undue permitting risk. But what does that actually mean? Like, if we just had guardrails to that, I think verbally, and
Yes.
then there was a consensus on that, then I think maybe then there would be the comfort level. I think that's what we're looking for.
So
that would be
verbally,
helpful.
I think it would be the permit in place, or a statement from DEEP that this was a highly confident process, which I don't expect is something to get, but as this advances, it's something we can explore. Alternatively, on the loan terms side, we think it might be productive to keep that conversation and open to working with the company. And so if there was a security term, for example, that had a security reserve that was to be maintained until the permit was approved, that enabled them to access, partial amount of the capital. And that was consistent with where we thought the permitting risk was at after the engineering report. Those might be some examples of milestones or, checkpoints that would satisfy that, and it enables us to be constructive and explore the problem open-endedly with the company and DEEP. Whereas if we specify it as permit needs to be in place, we feel that may start to separate from what is a well-assessed understanding of real risk relative to the outcomes of the permitting process. And
Yeah, if I could jump in also, I sorry, I didn't mean to take everyone down the rabbit hole, but I think that's a great approach. I'm not sure it needs to all be written up, but for example, one set of milestones might be that there is some sort of reserve that's, tapped at the end when the permit's issued, but accessed before that, and maybe, a portion right away, a portion deep issues, what's called a notice of tentative determination for permits. And that's usually a really good signal. It tells you where the agency is. And then you have the intervener risk after that. So that's always, I think, a good milestone that you might want to consider. Again, I have no problem trusting staff's judgment. I just, wanted to make sure we were all clear about this risk because, as Bert alluded to, and everyone knows, until you have it, you don't have it. And intervener risk is a real risk, but there are milestones along the way. There's the completed application milestone, there's the tentative determination milestone, and there's the permit. So, I think those are the tools you have, and I'm sure there's enough tools there to kind of judiciously or prudently, protect against the remaining risk and issue the funds as the risk dissipates. But I guess that's my take, having heard the discussion. I think it would be good to have some sort of reserve until the final permit.
Okay, noted. Yes, and I think that part of the intention, as Lee hinted at or said, this enables us to put that in place and together and respond to those milestones as they develop from Deep's perspective. And ultimately, it very may well be that capital doesn't flow until that permit is in place. And that's probably the base case scenario. And this approval as written here enables us to signal approval, contingent on that permit. So in a more formal way, which I think is a productive resolution for where we're at on the project.
And just
So with
a
that-
follow-up more from Matt. Matt, how do you feel about essentially delegating that development of a milestone strategy to staff? In other words, do we want to try to specify that today, or do we want to allow staff to determine what those milestones and release date or release amounts would be, and in effect approve the transaction subject to their creating that plan, if you will?
Yeah, I'm confident staff can do that. And I think with this discussion, if that's the approach, I am comfortable with it. Had it been presented with those sort of milestones, I think that would have given us more, like a concrete path. But that said, I think it's, I'm comfortable that staff wants to kind of be good shepherds of the money. So I'm fine with that approach. In the future, it's nice to know how much and when, but again, I think part of what I'm hearing from staff is they're worried about the cash flow of the company. I'm less worried about that, but I'm also mindful of it. I really want to make sure that we don't get hung out with $1.3 million and all of a sudden they get a cease and desist order.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And another variation on that theme that I think Austin put somewhat on the table is we can delegate that, the assignment to create that plan to staff, but then have them come back and check with either a deployment committee member or the board chair to confirm agreement with that plan. I unfortunately would have to abstain on the vote today, and also couldn't be that party to be the reviewer for the board. But I think that is another option on the table, is to have one more check by the board on the deployment schedule for the project.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep, and we're comfortable with the resolution as written, or with the addition of assigning, referral to board chair or designated member of the deployment committee, subject to Farnan sign off on text.
I mean, that works for me. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts.
Any more thoughts on the preference from the committee?
And I'll
Yeah,
just
no.
say, I mean, I compliment everybody's work on this. I know this is sort of our first step into our new chapter. And so, you know, I hope this isn't interpreted as us being overly cautious, but, you know, I think we just have to grow with the process a little bit here.
Yeah, I think it's appreciated, that caution actually, and for the record or for the understanding here that this was something that fully came to our attention on Monday of this week, and so we've been rapidly confirming the status of the air permit, and you know, had, as I said in my initial remarks, you know, took the technological resolution here as a permitting resolution here, and so you know, is not part of the plan for the types of requests that we would be presenting. But as we work through this, I think it's reflected here in the nature of this amendment to the resolution.
Mr. Chairman, can I
Sorry,
make a
lost you
motion?
guys. I would like to hear I was actually where I was going before I lost the connection, but
Yeah.
please.
Kimberly, do you have any more? I don't want to cut off the discussion. That's okay.
No, thank you.
I'll
I
move-
think
I'll
it's
move
been
it up.
a great discussion.
Yeah, I'll move adoption of resolution 2 as modified on the slide deck and additionally modified at the end of the highlighted language where it's subject to determination by staff that there's not an undue permitting risk with the facility upon review of applicable engineering report and any additional materials, and report back to the deployment committee on the milestones. Does that achieve everybody's goal?
To clarify, Matt, oh, somebody else.
Oh, so I was going to say, just to clarify, so we would potentially enter into the loan. If all these things were met, we wouldn't report back to deployment before signing those documents, or is a report out after the fact, or would you want that report out via email? What are you thinking? We'll make sure we do.
Well, the way it's written, we approve the applicant's capital solution proposal subject to, I would just say, 1, determination by staff, and 2, report back to the deployment committee on the disbursement milestones. So we're approving it. I don't know, Brian, like even under how it's written, when you would sign the document, because it was subject to. I was just saying, make it subject to as also, you know, reporting back on what the milestones are. Is that I don't know how it get the practical of how you do it. Does that prevent you from signing the documents if we word it that way?
No, I don't think it does. We would just have to show or demonstrate to the deployment committee or the APA if they were asked, like, yes, we did meet these requirements. And yes, we did report out as following, as set forth in this email communication, or as discussed in the next deployment or board meeting, where we could show them. So I think that would work.
Just to clarify, and maybe a question for you, Brian, that is something asynchronous with the deployment committee schedule to be able to move this forward, or some requirement otherwise? Meaning an email update with the plan for meeting those milestones, and then go from there?
I think so. Otherwise, we'd be in a scenario where we'd just be punting to the next deployment committee. So I think we'd have to go with that approach if we were going to authorize the resolution.
Lee, does that work?
Could I raise
Bert.
another possibility, and that is, I think in the flexibility of coming back and reviewing this, one of the suggestions I think I heard might have been from you, Matt, that maybe the disbursements are tied up in some kind of milestones. And so, and I think you had some good milestones there for staff to consider. But I just think that should be on the table as well. So it's not necessarily a 0-1, but it could be a progressive, so as an alternative.
Yeah, Bert, how about if and I'll stop short of amending, but conceptually, we'll revise the motion to read how it reads, and that staff shall identify and include appropriate milestones for the disbursement of funds. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
And to confirm, that would be acceptable via email, or would that require a meeting of the deployment committee?
I think the way that's written is you guys have the ideas of what the milestones are already. So you just, as part of your charge for the undue permitting risk, once you're satisfied there, you would, or before, you would also identify the milestones and just, I just think report them back to us. I don't think you need our approval on them after this. This is my read on it. If you want to solicit our input, that's fine, but
I think that's
we know
workable.
where to find you.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great outcome relative to the complexity of this particular transaction and allowing us to navigate both efficiently and effectively. So appreciate very much the candor and consideration from the committee members.
Okay, so moved.
Okay. So we have a motion. I guess we're going to take this. Well, before we take the motion, were there any other? We spent all of our time on that one issue. Were there any other issues that committee members wanted to raise before we go to that motion? Okay, hearing none, we have a motion on the table as amended by Green Bank staff and further amended with Matt's edits. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right.
Opposed? And abstain, that's going to be me. I'm abstaining because there's a active permit in front of Deep on this matter. So it sounds like it carried all in favor and one abstention.
All right. Great. Thank you. That was a great conversation, discussion, guidance there, and our first environmental infrastructure work through. So it is a process. So thank you all for the support there. Okay, so now let's move to another conversation around CPACE for resilience and what we're thinking about in terms of lending policy. So I'll turn it here to Mackie and Elise to kick off the discussion.
Great, thanks, Brian, and good afternoon, everyone. So today we will be talking about a very broad lending policy for Green Bank within the CPACE program for resilience measures. They're not asking they have no particular projects or anything to put forward here, but we had a discussion a few board meetings ago about the CPACE program guidelines, and there was very lengthy discussion around that, at least on the staff side, we felt that before we started to even do any work in terms of market development, thinking about what projects would look like, that we wanted to make sure we were aligned with where the board, for the committee and where the board is on our activity in this space. So I wanted to start by putting forward, again, a very broad lending policy in terms of what our underwriting would look like and where we would focus within the very broad definition of resilience to make sure we're aligned and that it's worth investing the staff time to go out and try to develop the market, find projects that would eventually come before either this committee or the board. So next slide. So with that sort of overview, jump into the background and then the proposal. So folks will probably recall that back in 2022, there was a law or Public Act passed, Public Act 22-6, that expanded the framework of CPACE, which had been just energy focused, to include financing for resilience measures as well. You see the very broad definition for that here. So with that passage, interestingly, actually, the CPACE statute is completely separate from the Green Bank enabling statute. So once this was passed and the work done to create the program guidelines, which the board approved, lenders could finance projects through CPACE, but the Green Bank couldn't, because although again, CPACE wasn't able to do it, the Green Bank wasn't. It wasn't until the environmental infrastructure passage that us even contemplating taking advantage of the CPACE authority became available. So this passed. Next slide. And as I referenced, Elise worked with several stakeholders to build out the guidelines to implement that statutory expansion. The Green Bank, as the administrator of the CPACE program, is charged with developing the guidelines and then overseeing the program and approving all the projects that private lenders bring in. So with this guideline expansion in place, approved by the board in 2024, the market was open on the private lender side to do these projects. And let me turn it over to Elise to give a little background on those guidelines, as well as talk about our proposed lending policy.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mackie. So yeah, just to speak to the guidelines a little bit more here. This is certainly a new aspect of the CPACE program that we're venturing into. And as Mackie alluded to, the definition of resilience is, excuse me, is very broad. So we needed a way to kind of understand what was going on in the market and understand what the market needs were in terms of financing. So we built those guidelines to be broad and also to, as Mackie alluded to, allow for the third-party capital providers that are eligible to work in the Connecticut market to start to find some of those, which they have, which is really exciting. But this is kind of what you're seeing here on the screen now is kind of how we approached the guidelines and the new technical appendix that we added for resilience. So then taking this a little bit further, next slide. Thank you. So this is a quick overview. All folks have probably seen this a few different times now. We presented this and we talked about the guidelines last year. But just to kind of give you an idea of like the basics of the new additions and what some of the exemptions are for resilience. So a lot of you will recall with clean energy measures, with renewable energy and energy efficiency projects that go through the CPACE program, there's a savings to investment ratio that's required. So the savings have to be greater than the investment for those types of projects. For resilience improvements, as well as EV charging infrastructure projects that were all part of that Public Act, that is an exemption that was included. So there is no SIR requirement for resilience improvements. However, all of the other standard CPACE eligibility requirements still stand. So it still needs to be a commercial property. The municipality that the building is in still needs to be participating in the program. And if there's an existing mortgage holder or senior debt holder, they need to provide consent to subordinate to CPACE. So all of that is still standing. But some of the new things that are required are a resilience study, which will be basically coming in place of like an energy audit or a feasibility study that you may see from an energy efficiency project or from a renewable energy project. So a resilience study is required. Within that resilience study, one thing I want to point out in particular is the assessment of cost savings. So even though we don't require a very specific savings to investment ratio of greater than 1, we do still require that there is an assessment of cost savings included in the resilience study, and that is per the statute. That's written in the statute that needs to be included in the study. All right, and next slide here. And then just to kind of further, before we jump into the actual Green Bank lending policy focus, we just wanted to show you a quick reminder of the Green Bank's scope expansion into environmental infrastructure through this public act. And this information was also in the memo, but just mentioning again that funds for any CPACE project financing for resilience would not be coming from ratepayer or RGGI funds, since those are specifically designed for clean energy or designated for clean energy projects. All right, and so this is what we're presenting as our, as Mackie said, very broad, very kind of generic lending policy when it comes to the Green Bank financing resilience projects through CPACE. So the financing programs team, along with the environmental infrastructure team and the investments team, work together to come up with these 2 areas of focus that Mackie mentioned earlier. One is the financial underwriting aspects, and then the second is the actual measures that we will be focusing on. So first, just to talk about the financial underwriting, really as Bert and Priyank and the rest of the team and we had these discussions, we really kind of settled on the fact that there really weren't going to be many changes to how we were approaching the financial underwriting. Most of the requirements are still going to be the same. So everything you're seeing here under financial underwriting are things that we're already doing from a Green Bank perspective on our financial underwriting for CPACE projects. So due diligence and review of previous 3 years and current year financials for the property owner entity. We have lien and loan to value maximums that we're looking at, debt service coverage ratio requirements. We do an environmental due diligence check on all of our projects as well. And then, of course, if there's an existing mortgage holder, any property secured debt, we would need to get consent there. So I will certainly let Bert or Priyank jump in there if there's anything to add, but really it's kind of, we'll take these projects in as we normally would with the understanding that they'll be financed through CPACE. And we'll also kind of experience what those projects are looking like and take things into consideration that may need to be changed in the future. But for the most part, financial underwriting is going to pretty much look the same. And then in terms of the measures.
Priyank, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, thank you. Very quickly, just wanted to reinforce the lien to value and loan to value maximums. We also will require appraisals if required. So our typical policy is we need valuation report, which is a standard appraisal that's 36 months old or newer from the date of our term sheet issuance. So that's again just a standard requirement we have. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Priyank. Yes, that's another good point. Bert, anything from you? Are we on that?
Nope, we're good. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you. And then just in terms of the measures, so this is kind of the part where we're getting into the new territory, are looking at the types of resilience measures that we would focus on. So again, in discussions with staff on this, we settled on kind of focusing on projects that would help to adapt to climate change or mitigate climate change challenges. And that would be focused on projects that are seeking to make nature-based resilience improvements, which we're going to go through A couple of examples of that here in a few minutes, and also projects that are seeking fortified designation. So fortified roof, fortified silver, or fortified gold designations, which we'll talk about that in a few slides as well. But this is kind of the basic policy that we came up with to give the committee and the board some guidance on, what types of projects we're actually going to be potentially considering and how we would be looking at them from an underwriting perspective. So let's go to the next slide.
Yep, and I
All
can
right.
jump in here, Elise.
Thank you, Lee.
Yep. So I'm chiming in just to provide some tangible examples of potential consideration of nature-based solutions measures before passing it back to Elise to do the same for fortified designation. Just wanted to run this aground as there is some confusion at times of what is encompassed and why it's important relative to other things that commercial building owners may be interested in pursuing. So first, just kicking off, what is a nature-based solution? Actions to protect, sustainably manage, or restore natural or modified ecosystems to address societal challenges while providing measurable co-benefits to people and nature. So really, we are advancing and prioritizing nature-based solutions in alignment with the comprehensive plan and with a board memo presented last summer, the Environmental Infrastructure Strategic Assessment of Market Readiness. Increasingly, we are seeing nature-based solutions put to use to reduce climate risks, such as coastal and inland flooding, drought, wildfire, and urban heat. They are well-known, trusted, and highly vetted as having the potential to deliver cheaper, easier, and longer-term climate risk solutions, in addition to the provision of many co-benefits when compared to more conventional approaches. So many examples to draw from. One that I'm using here is from a 2017 academic publication, The Value of Coastal Wetlands for Flood Damage Reduction in the Northeastern United States. And that is the finding that oyster reefs can cost up to 6 times less than seawalls and provide similar or better shoreline protection in moderate wave environments. That is just on the basis of cost for shoreline protection, not to dig into what the water filtration benefits, the carbon sequestration benefits, and the food and GDP activity benefits that can come from something like an intact oyster reef. So it is really separate from kind of the storm protection, the capacity to also deliver cheaper, easier, more durable greenhouse gas reduction emission offsets. Emission offset or reductions. So per IPCC reporting, 99.9% of all current carbon removal comes from nature-based mechanisms. All right, next slide. When we think about this in the CPACE context, what we're talking about in relation to a potential set of nature-based solutions for flood and stormwater management, these could be designed, building, or site retrofits such as bioswales, pervious pavement, rain gardens, or green roofs that capture, slow, and filter stormwater using natural or hybrid infrastructure. So could be green-gray, reducing flood and drainage risk while enhancing property resilience. So the benefits the benefits of nature-based solutions in comparison to more conventional approaches, measures like bioswales or permeable surfaces can reduce localized flooding and extend the life of drainage infrastructure, and altogether at a lower life cycle cost than other conventional hardscape retrofits. We do have our first example of this. It is a third-party CPACE project that was approved in Darien, closed by Counterpoint, that over the life cycle of the pervious pavement solution that they've put in place will manage 650,000 gallons of storm water a year, and also ease the drainage burden and prevent surface pooling on site. So we do have our first example of this being used by a commercial building owner, and fun fact, also the largest Connecticut CPACE project to date. Next slide. Other ways to think about potential building measures under the auspice of nature-based solutions, those that could address the peril of extreme heat. So this could include measures designed natural or hybrid systems like urban tree canopy, vegetated roofs, shade structures, or other things that help to reduce building heat, lower local air temperatures, cut cooling energy demand, and offer durable, cost-effective protection against those extreme heat spikes. So we know urban trees and green infrastructure can reduce surface and air temperatures. That can be up to 5 to 15 degrees. They can help to lower building cooling costs by 20 to 30% and also extend roof life. That is not counting the co-benefits that come from that type of measure, such as improved air quality, carbon storage, or stormwater management benefits. And so have included here a living roof example at Laurel Hall at the University of Connecticut Storrs campus. Next slide. And then one other climate adaptation or climate risk peril, sea level rise for folks who followed along. The latest projections from Yukon Circa is that we can expect 20 inches of sea level rise by the year 2050 here in Connecticut. And so we can think about measures that would fall under the nature-based solution categorical definition as design natural or hybrid systems like living shorelines and coastal wetlands that reduce flooding, storm impacts, erosion, and land loss, offering durable, cost-effective protection. The benefits, not unlike the example I spoke to earlier with oyster reefs, living shorelines can be significantly cheaper than seawalls in managing erosion and storm surge with all kinds of co-benefits. And for folks who've been following along, the New York Times last month covered the unique risk that is already hitting places like the Mystic Seaport Museum, which is a 19-acre site with 150 structures, and it also has a marina that hosts or harbors, I should say, 900 boats a year. So it's already a very material risk to the continual operability of the Mystic Seaport Museum, and they're really looking for many types of solutions which could potentially fall under the future auspice of a sea-based resilience measure. So just a potential example there, entirely speculative, but certainly one that hits home. And with that, I'll pass it over to Elise to talk to Fortified.
Great, thank you, Lee. Yeah, the great overview of those, just a couple of examples that we felt were really material, especially here in Connecticut, to the challenges that we see from climate change, and how using this financing could potentially help to adapt to those. So thank you for the overview on those, Lee. And then just pivoting now to Fortified, another program that I think the board and the committee has seen a few times now. But Fortified is a program through IBHS, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. And it was developed as a standard and is a designation program to help reduce damage to structures. This program can actually be used across any different property types. It's applicable to residential, multifamily, and commercial. But the idea is to help keep businesses open or recover more quickly from severe weather or damage due to climate change factors. So Fortified is really, if you're thinking about it, it's, building envelope, roof, those types of things. You can see the different standards here. And then, yeah, next slide. Thank you, Brian, is just kind of showing you how those step up from one to the other. So roof is kind of the basic designation. And then it steps up to silver with a couple of additional things. And then gold is the top tier. Fortified roof and fortified silver are traditionally used in retrofit situations, and gold is usually used in a new construction situation, just because it would be really difficult to retrofit a property to meet all of these gold standards, based on what the standards are there. So that's kind of typically the split between these two. So just to talk through some of the future considerations. So what Mackie had alluded to earlier, just in regards to, you know, why we're bringing this to you all, and hoping for a recommendation to the board to approve this lending policy, is there's certainly lots of work to be done, and lots of things for us to consider as we develop a new aspect of the CPACE program, as we venture into this new aspect of the CPACE program. One of the biggest things that we would be looking to do would be to recruit contractors and developers. I'm putting that in quotes, you know, folks that are actually going to be doing this work, to get them on board, get them to understand that this is an option, that they can use CPACE financing for these types of improvements, and also to train them and make sure that they have the tools that they need to use this program actually in the market. As we've alluded to in the past with energy projects with CPACE, about 80% of our projects come from contractor lead generation. So they're a really important partner, and they would be one of the first stops in terms of, you know, our building this part of our CPACE program out. And then continuing to think about how we're capturing the value, understanding that there's no concrete savings to investment ratio that we're looking at, but there is value in these projects, because of course, if there wasn't, maybe a property owner wouldn't really want to be doing them. So thinking about things like insurance premium reductions, or deductible reductions, expanded insurance coverage. We know that's been a thing that's been out there, you know, people losing their insurance coverage altogether. And then of course, things like avoided maintenance costs. You know, if you don't have a basement that floods any longer, because you were able to install a rain garden and some pervious concrete, that helps to stop that pooling around your foundation. Maybe you don't have to pay your maintenance supervisor to come in and, you know, bail water out every couple of months when we have a big storm or we have that spring thaw. And then of course, the ability to keep businesses open and operating. You know, so if there was any type of storm damage, being able to think about fortifying your envelope, your building envelope, to make sure that it can withstand those storms, or those different weather events, so that way you can stay open, and not have to shut down your business if any of those things happen, which of course would allow you to continue to gather revenue. And then also potentially working with appraisers regarding property value, due to increased resilience improvements. As we were having these discussions internally, this is a point Bert made that was a really, really good one, that when we first ventured into CPACE projects, and we were doing clean energy projects back, 10, 11, 12 years ago, this wasn't always a thing that appraisers were able to do. Look at clean energy improvements and be able to value them and include them in, what they would consider an upgrade to the building. So we're hoping that we can work with appraisers on this type of aspect as well in the future, and work with them on valuing these different measures, and showing the actual benefits to the property. And then, of course, last but not least, as we always do with the CPACE program and all of our programs, is as we gather more market intel and we see more projects come through, talk to more folks, do a lot more research, just understanding what the market needs are, what's out there, what are the considerations, and adapting our policy and potentially even our guidelines as we start to see some more of these projects come through. And staff thinks that we've done a good job of setting our guidelines up to do just that, be flexible, and of course, using our policy for lending in the same manner, being flexible and adapting, being resilient, if you will, to the different types of projects that we see come through. And with that, Just putting up the recommendation here again from the memo, but happy to open this up for discussion before we get to the resolution.
Any questions or comments from the committee?
I do, yes. I guess maybe I missed it. In the materials, is there a revised version of the CPACE program guidelines that sort of writes these policy ideas into the existing guidance? Or or is it just this memo?
It's just the memo. So the Green Bank lending policy is specific to the Green Bank. The guidelines are for the entire program. So the guidelines are what the third-party capital providers are going to use. Of course, we use them as well, but the policy that we're presenting today is just for Green Bank lending. So that wouldn't be something that we would build into the guidelines. That would just be an internal policy for Green Bank lending.
Okay, but do the outside lenders underwrite resiliency projects?
Yes.
So, I mean, is there a need to update the program guidance if they're already writing financing projects like this without any sort of guidance, or is that?
So Matt, let me step back. The Green Bank has two roles in CPACE: the statutorily designated administrator of the program, and then as a lender. The administrator role we have to do, which that's where the guideline development comes from. When the resilience expansion happened, we wrote that into the guidelines, and that was approved by the board in June of 2024. So the programmatic administrator resiliency expansion is done. And as Lee alluded to, we have had one third-party capital provider already incorporate that into a new construction project they did. However, just like with energy and CPACE financing, we see the private market focused on large new construction projects. So it's great that they're incorporating resiliency in, but they're doing it when they can lend more money, when it enables them to lend more money into a new construction project. We're not seeing them take advantage of the expansion without there trying to gin up retrofit projects. So that's why we thought, let's look at our lending side and see if we can enable I think primarily the retrofit resiliency market with our lending. So our lending policies are all internal documents that pertain just to our lending and don't influence the third-party lenders.
Yeah. Okay. So in other words, we've already baked the resiliency, what we need, into the administrator side of our tasks.
Right, exactly. And we saw it when we had those guideline discussions with the board. There was robust discussion around the appropriateness of that CPACE expansion, which on the guidelines side we kind of had to do. But before we move forward with thinking about lending, because of that discussion, we wanted to make sure there was that there was a desire to use our lending arm in this manner as well. So hence this initial internal policy around resilience.
Well, I just have three comments then. Thanks, Mackie. The three comments which you guys can take. One is in our future, like as board members, when we get these projects, we aren't going to have the SIR number to rely on, which so kind of going to leave us to judge the value, which is fine, but I think it would be helpful where an SIR can be calculated to calculate it, just so we have sort of the number if it's applicable. I mean, some projects may have no SIR, but I do think when we get our reports, it would be nice to keep the SIR as a calculation, even though there's no minimum requirement. And then two is on the fortified. I think we had this discussion, and I don't see it in the memo. We might want to write that fortified or a different standard deemed equivalent by staff, because I mean, that's a lot of times when they write regulations and they write in private standards, there's A, other people who feel left out, and B, those standards may change. So I think it's a good safety valve to allow anyone to make the case that their standard's the equivalent. I think fortified's a great standard, but that's just a thought. And then the last one is, I wasn't clear from the presentation if we're limiting our financing to nature-based solutions. And if that's the case, I think we should consider widening it, because there's a lot of retrofit. And actually, Brian Garcia and I were talking about the MS4 permits just before this, and directly connected impervious surface in a lot of old developments. By disconnecting it, which is something that could be financed, it does, I think, provide real relief, especially in, older urban centers or towns that have center cores that were largely paved and connected to the storm system. And then you get overflows and backups and everything arrives at the same time, where by disconnecting it, you can stagger the first flush. So if we're limiting it to nature-based solutions, I think we ought to, not for today, but we ought to consider coming back and widening in the envelope a little.
Just a quick point on that. So we are not limiting it, Matt, to just nature-based solutions.
Okay.
I think that's kind of the extreme.
Yeah.
And there are going to be things like in between. So we wanted to stress the extreme of nature-based and everything in between. Yeah.
Okay, great. That's all I have.
And Matt, just to speak to your comment about the SIR, there is a component of the resilience study that needs to be included per the statute that shows a cost analysis. So we are getting some sort of an analysis on what those savings could potentially be. So we do get something along those lines that will show us what the savings are relative to the savings. I'm putting that in quotes, but what that looks like in terms of the cost analysis, and that could come in a variety of different ways. Like I mentioned a couple of them. Maybe it's insurance premium reductions. Maybe it's maintenance cost avoidance. Maybe it's saying, last year we had 20 storm events where we needed to close our shop for 20 days because we lost power. We didn't, our roof caved in, or we, lost a window. So now we did a fortified project, and, we're going to be able to, we anticipate staying open 20 extra days, which means, another $100,000 in revenue. So that will be included in these resilience studies that we'll be able to share with the board.
But if you could turn those into an SIR, I mean, as board members, we just can't get into the weeds, and frankly, may not understand the weeds.
Yeah.
So I know it would be an imperfect number, but it was, it just gives us something that's digestible, if you will.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise we're never going to be able to evaluate it as in detail as you guys are.
Sure. No, that's totally fair. I think that's definitely something we can look into, is, how should I put it? Kind of concatenating some numbers for you all, and giving you a summary of what we are seeing from those studies on what the savings could be, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I had a similar question around just thinking about how the loan amount is determined, particularly on a program like Fortified. So would it, if it's a retrofit project, would you essentially lend against the full cost of the retrofit, or are you looking at an incremental cost relative to what the Fortified program adds to the cost of that retrofit, or how do you determine what's an appropriate loan amount for a program like this?
Yeah,
it would be the full cost of the project, similar to like we do on the energy side. It's not the incremental cost between code and what they're going above. It's the intent is to offer full project financing. Those would be in the energy side. We have the SIR as a governor on how much can go in. That wouldn't be in place here. So as long as the project is eligible from a CPACE perspective, the entire cost would be eligible. We do have our underwriting governors though, which would, which would limit the potential, the DSCR for the borrower, it has to be at least 1.25. And then the lien and loan to values could also limit what we finance. But just from a pure eligibility standpoint, assuming those underwriting things to limit us, the entire project cost would be eligible.
And so Mackie, that would, if you had a retrofit, they're doing that group of things that qualify, let's say for silver. But then they were also putting in a lot of new equipment or doing a lot of other things as part of that project. Would that whole scope be subject to the financing, or would it just be the fortified scope?
We could, I mean, I guess I'd be interested in your perspective on that. We could stretch it. And on the energy side, we have a concept of associated measures. So things that are not meet the statutory definition of the energy improvement, but it's like a roof. If you're putting solar on and you need a new roof, we allow you to finance the roof because it's an associated measure. You could make an argument that even though it's not a resilience measure, as part of pursuing the fortified designation, you are doing these other things. So therefore it's an associated measure. You could stretch it that way, but I guess we'd want y'all's feedback on whether we should go in that direction, or do we just want to stick to the purely the measures that meet the resiliency definition?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, it'd be interesting to see if you could think of a way to define an associated measure that's relevant. So, a lot of the energy efficiency stuff, if you need an electrical upgrade, that sort of thing, looks like it's very closely linked to the rest of the project. It makes sense here. I don't know how easy that would be for you all to do. It seems like that would be more challenging in this context.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be interesting to see, and to that point and going back, I think, Commissioner, I think it would be interesting to see what folks bring us, and what they kind of are coming to the table with, and kind of what they're justifying. I think that's going to give us the best understanding of what, again, maybe the market needs are, what we might see. Often with some of these types of projects, we might see a trend, and we certainly saw that on the energy side with CPACE. With Mackie just talked about solar and roofs, right? We saw, I think, half of our projects that we do rooftop solar on are doing a roof upgrade too. So we might naturally see some of those, those things come out in the wash as we see some projects. So it's a good point, and something we would definitely want to discuss with the committee and with the board moving forward.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, it sounds like we're ready for the resolution. So can I have a motion for a resolution number 3?
This is Dominic, so moved.
Okay, second? I'll second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, all in favor?
Excellent. Agenda 5B is the one that we removed earlier. So let's go ahead and proceed forward to agenda item 6A, which is Volt Post. And let me turn this over to, is it Bert, Desiree, and Larry?
Yeah, Desiree will be leading. Desiree, you there?
Sorry, I was muted. Good
Okay.
afternoon. I'm Desiree Miller from the investments team. I want to walk you through an interesting deal we've been putting together with a company called Volt Post. So our deal would help Vaultpost finance its expenses related to its participation in Connecticut's Innovative Energy Solutions pilot. Next slide, please. Okay. Vaultpost is an early stage startup pioneering street lamp affixed EV chargers. By tapping into the electricity feeding the street lamps, Vaultpost can massively cut down on the installation costs compared to typical level 2 EV chargers. Vaultpost is expected to partner with Connecticut-based manufacturer EVSE for the hardware in the pilot, the chargers themselves. Now I want to get into the pilot a bit. So if you're not aware, Connecticut's Innovative Energy Solutions Program is a statewide initiative to develop innovative ideas that enable a decarbonized, affordable, and equitable electricity grid. It's led by PURA with funding coming from the two major utilities in the state. Vaultpost has been awarded $1.3 million in the IES program. And for the pilot, they have to achieve the 5 milestones you see here in the table. The first milestone is located, it's essentially deploying 40 to 60 charging stations over 18 months and then measuring and reporting the data from those charging stations. So very notably, the revenue that would be coming from the utilities is not tied in any way to the utilization of the chargers and the revenue coming off the chargers. So it's really just meeting these 5 milestones, which we go through them quickly. They're very straightforward and at least at this point seem very achievable. So number 1, locating the sites. Number 2, any electricity upgrades, i.e. is the electricity that's feeding the lamppost sufficient to feed a charger? 3, installing those chargers. 4, collecting data. 5, reporting on that data. Next slide, please. So what would our loan look like? How would we help this process? So essentially we would be lending against the costs of Vaultpost costs for the milestones. So our maximum loan size would be $1 million, but we would only lend up to 90% of the costs of a given milestone. The loan would be structured as a revolver. So the green bank would be repaid directly by the utilities when Vaultpost has successfully completed a given milestone. So we'd be repaid. We would essentially keep the principal and the accrued interest and then disperse the whatever extra because we're only lending 90%. We would disperse the remainder back to Vaultpost because we'd be over collecting. Because we know there could be delays in repayments, we would be willing to lend up to 2 milestones at once. And then one element that makes this deal very unique for us at the Green Bank is the inclusion of safe notes, which give us some equity upside in the deal. And I'm sure many of you are unfamiliar with safe notes. They are a fundraising vehicle for early stage startups. They're not debt. They are similar to a call option. So when you buy a call in a stock, you don't have equity today. What you have is equity if the call hits a certain strike price. Then you go in the money and you can purchase that stock at. So a safe note is a little bit different. You go in the money when the startup closes its next priced round. So in the case of Vaultpost, you go in the money, or the $75,000 safe note becomes equity and not just a safe note when Vaultpost closes its Series A, which it's targeting to do at the end of 2025. And then the rest of the terms are just a 5% interest rate, 2-year loan, so giving a little bit of leeway on the 18-month pilot program. And then our collateral would be a lien on the chargers, getting direct payment from the utilities, and a parent level guarantee by Vaultpost. And here you have the structure. And then that's it. Any questions?
Any questions? I did have one. Desiree, could you just explain that safe note and the equity provision? As I read it, it sounded to me like the equity upside is there, but they can buy it out if they choose during that 2-year window. Can you just explain how that works?
Yeah, so with a safe note, essentially this is called okay, this is going to get a little complicated. This is called the post money safe. So if one of the terms of the safe note is, I think, expecting a valuation of $26 million for the company. If the valuation turns out to be higher than $26 million, a safe note holder would essentially get a windfall. They would keep that same percentage of equity ownership, but they would own, more money because the company is worth more. So Vault Post, to protect against us getting a big windfall for what amounts to a very short-term, I guess, investment, they are willing to buy us out, or they've not willing, they've asked for the option to buy us out at par at $75,000 within 2 years. So I would say first of all, if this does convert to, if these safe notes do convert to equity, I would say it's a possibility, not a certainty that they'll want to buy us out. They're a startup stage. They're making some revenue from charging, but they're dependent on fundraising under their own predictions until 2029. So it's not a certainty that they're going to decide that the best use of their cash is buying out the green bank. So while they can buy out the green bank at par, which is a fine deal for us, we get $75,000 instead of equity in what amounts to in a illiquid company. They both have their pluses.
Got it. Okay, so it's an equity with the value probably capped around 75,000. I get it.
Or
okay.
higher. It could go
Maybe
higher.
a little higher, but if it's worth more, they're likely to buy you out at 75.
If they're cash rich, they'll buy us out. If they, need to keep their cash judiciously, they might not.
Yep.
Desiree,
Okay.
how do they pay for the power? Like streetlight power is unmetered. Will it be metered at the EV charger?
The idea is that there would be a meter for each charger.
Okay.
They're still working out. So that's part of the pilot, is working out these logistical questions. But that would be a concept that each charger would be metered, and then perhaps be able to participate in other ancillary services like demand response.
And a similar question is, I presume there's some payment method. So when you use the charger, it takes a credit card, or it's got like an amp up kind of connection to allow for payments.
Yeah, if you have an EV you've charged publicly somewhere, it would they've developed some proprietary software for receiving payment.
Something similar. Okay. Any other questions? Really interesting technology. I'm curious, and again, we don't have a lot of time today, but I'd be curious to understand how they determine the appropriate locations, given that EVs aren't equally distributed around the state, how they determine where there's going to be adequate interest in using this technology, but it sure is an interesting technology.
Definitely.
Okay, so I guess we're ready for resolution number 5. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
A second? I'll second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion carried. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to shift to agenda item 6B, and let's see, Mariana, we got you on.
I'm on. Save the best for
Perfect.
last.
There we go. Second to
Um,
last.
I'm still the next one. I'm
That's
still
right.
doing the
That's
next
right.
one. So the two last ones. Hi everybody, and thank you for having us today. By way of background, we're coming to you with this project at the Deep Marine Headquarters. Under the current authorities that we have, port authorities that we have a sort of what's called a commercial solar program and solar map plus authority that enables us to deploy commercial solar. And as part of that approval, we're able to be the long-term owners of solar for these types of commercial projects, which include nonprofits, municipalities, public schools, and multifamily properties. Separately, we have another authority that is associated with state solar projects, which is focused again on deploying solar in state-owned properties. And that specific authority allows development costs to be recovered through asset sales via an RFP or bond issuance. And as part of that SAP or state program, we are developing a portfolio of projects, of which one of these is a 155 kilowatt rooftop solar at Deep Marine Headquarters, which has completed construction earlier this month, and it's expected to receive commercial operation. And by that, we need the utilities approval to energize by early August. And within the authority that we have, we would have to either issue an RFP or a bond issuance, which is not really practical to do due to the project size and timing. We have an additional portfolio of projects as part of these larger portfolio that is expected to energize in around 12 months. Those projects are typically larger with a few larger rooftops and carports, and hence where they're a little bit delayed in the development process. And so therefore, we're asking the deployment committee to give the Green Bank approval to retain ownership and operation of this one project instead of, again, issuing an RFP or bond issuance, just because of the size and the timing, which is not practical to do for just one project. We typically like to do these in portfolios to reduce the overall cost. So with that, again, the recommendation and request is to approve an equity investment of up to $350,000 to own and operate the Deep Marine Headquarter project. I'll take any questions or otherwise ask for the resolution to be moved.
Marina, it's Matt. Does this mean like we would be responsible for the replacing of inverters, fixing panels, like the day-to-day? And do we have like a contract for the rest of our portfolio?
Yes,
So-
great
okay.
question. So we have authority to own projects, just not state projects, but we have authority to do that under our current sort of commercial solar authority. And in fact, we own about, I think it's 40 megawatts of projects. Those include commercial and residential. So we have a full asset management team that does some of that asset management in-house and has a long-term O&M contract with a contractor. So this can easily roll into that platform. And in fact, we went back to the board and asked for approval to allow for long-term ownership. I don't know if you recall of the affordable of projects, especially because we're targeting affordable multifamily, and it's just hard to go into other ownership platforms given sort of the size and timing of those. So we have a structure, a platform, a team, outside contracts where we can easily roll this project in. It's just we have sort of a separate authority for state projects that wasn't clear in our ability to own projects because we did expect to develop these in larger portfolios, multi-megawatt portfolios. And we expected to sort of sell those as part of an RFP, but just given the timing of this project, which was simpler than some of the others that are in the portfolio, it's done, it's ready, and waiting for some of those other projects in the portfolio, which could take up to 12 months, would mean that project would sit idly. And there's sort of technical reasons why that's not the best path to sort of have a project ready to go and not interconnected.
I mean, that's great. I'm glad to know we have that. It's fine with me. My only suggestion is, and this is offline, maybe we ought to think about kind of having a dashboard for this project or other portfolio projects that schools could tap into and, use this as a teaching tool or a field trip tool, especially down at Marine headquarters, which is nice. But we used to do that. And if there's a no-cost way, I assume we have a dashboard anyway. It might be nice to take advantage of having a project like this that schools could use for educational purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you may recall, we've done a bunch of projects in schools with our municipal schools, and that's something that we always integrate is that dashboard, so it can be integrated into like the curriculum. For some reason, they don't like to take the kids up to the roofs to show them, so they got to do it virtually. But I hear your point, and we can think about doing that with this one also.
You'd send up a drone.
Right.
The kids could probably operate that for us too.
As long as they don't crash it into the panels, we're good.
Right. Just to clarify,
it could be a good field trip. I mean, it's pretty down there and all, but also just, for our science class or all the resiliency and deep headquarters there, it really could be a good benefit. We're always looking for increasing the value of our projects, for schools that don't have their own or whatever. There's a lot of synergy down at that area of the Marine headquarters.
Yep. And we're also doing one at the fish hatchery. So, I could see opportunities there as well for a cool field trip of going to see fish and solar.
Just to clarify, the equity, is that an interim solution that will roll into this RFP later on, or do you propose to continue the equity ownership?
No, we would propose owning, being the long-term owners, and the reason being is because once you energize the system, if you do change ownership within the first 5 years, you trigger an ITC recapture. So that's why we're sort of in this position where it doesn't make sense for the project to sit idly, and the moment we interconnect it, it has to be the long-term owner, or else you trigger that ITC recapture.
Got it. Any other questions or comments from the team? Okay, so we're ready for resolution number 6. Do we have a motion?
So moved. This is Kim.
Second.
Okay. In a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Resolution number 6 passes.
All right, here we are. Agenda item 7A. Keep going, Mariana.
I'll just keep going there. Yeah. So if you could go to the next slide. We developed a loan loss decision process years ago. I think it was before COVID, was updated with COVID. And the loss decision process has been updated. And the main reason why we updated it is because we didn't have a process spelled out in that loan loss decision process that addressed project terminations for commercial solar projects that we develop, like the one I just mentioned, that are terminated prior to construction completion. So if you can follow the org chart on your left, we usually sign PPA or site lease with the property owner, secure an incentive, used to be a ZREC, now NRES incentive, and sometimes those happen sort of in tandem or the incentive is secured before, and then subsequently move towards signing an EPC or engineering procurement and construction agreement with the installer. That's typically done through an RFP process. And it is once we have that EPC agreement where we start to sort of incur work associated with interconnection, permitting, drawings, installation, etc. And it so happens at some point that projects need to be terminated. And I will say that throughout that process, these projects are, in our books, are entered as a receivable asset. And it so happens that if this commercial solar project is unable to finalize installation, this usually happens before sort of construction begins on site, usually during sort of the interconnection permitting process, or there's a reason why a project needs to be terminated. And this usually happens because of interconnection costs, permitting challenges, or just side conditions that make the project unable to move forward. We needed sort of a structure to what would happen to these projects if they were terminated. And sorry, let me take a step back. But if a project isn't terminated, we either sell it to a third party, and therefore that's again in our books, that's recorded as an asset sale, or we keep it as like a long-term ownership, like we just mentioned with the Marine headquarters, and that is sort of changed to a capital asset. So when a project is terminated, again, in those early stages, and I've added some info here about historical terminations, we wanted to be able to address how this was going to be handled as part of our loss decision process. So if you could go to the next slide. Our proposed process would entail having an annual budget for these unrecoverable costs, and that would be developed internally as part of the annual budget process. It would be developed by accounting, investments, and programs teams based on the pipeline of projects and approved through the annual board budget process. And then once that sort of termination budget is set, if there are any project termination budgets, if they do not exceed that budget allocation, then it would be approved by staff. And then anything in excess of what had already been included in the budget would be approved depending sort of based on how much an aggregate would be in addition to what had already been allocated through the budget. So anything less than 100,000 would go to the staff, between 100,000 and $1 million to deployment, and then anything greater than $1 million would go to the board to approve of that termination. I will mention here that we've shared this process at the ACG committee, since that's sort of the procedure required for when the loss decision process is updated, is for us to discuss with ACG, who then recommends bringing it forward to the deployment committee and then to the board as part of that discussion. And I know, at least Matt, you were part of that discussion. Some members asked to confirm with our auditors if we also needed a reserve associated with that project termination budget. And we're in a bit of a catch-22 because we have not selected our auditors from the most recent RFP, need board approval to do that. So can't consult them until we have board approval to select our auditors. But that will be part of what the team here, the staff, would be confirming with auditors, is if an additional reserve is needed and those recommendations would be incorporated. If you could go on to the next slide. Just as part of the loss decision process, what we also did is, this hadn't been updated in a couple of years. So we did some other revisions, which just aligned the loss decision process with the Green Bank's project structures. It streamlined the language to just improve consistency, clarity, and flow, and updated reserve percentages and added some practical examples to sort of guide some of the implementation. So with that, I'll take any questions.
You have any questions? Maybe everyone is recognizing that we're at our hour.
And otherwise,
Or-
I guess that. Oh, go ahead.
Or the presentation was extremely clear and complete.
I'll take that as the fact that the presentation was clear and complete. No, I know you all have spent a lot of time through some of our other transactions, but the request here would be for deployment committee to approve bringing this to the board so that they can approve the revised loss decision process.
Okay. So hearing no questions or comments, can we get that motion
So moved.
in a second? I'll second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries, all in favor. Brian, any other agenda items?
No, that's it. And thank you all for allowing us to extend that additional hour. You saw that we had some pretty unique stuff, great conversation, great guidance there. But no, that's it. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay. All right, and we used that extra hour completely. All right, so can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, a second? I'll second. All right, thank you, everybody. Very productive meeting and excellent presentations. Appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Aye, everyone.